All right, in this section, we're going to be covering psychotic disorders, and they focus on the condition of psychosis. Psychosis is a withdrawal from reality marked by hallucinations and delusions, disturbed thoughts and emotions, and a personality that's become disorganized. I'm going to be breaking down a lot of these terms, and we're going to start off with delusions. So, delusions are a false belief that's held against all contrary evidence. And so, there's different types of delusions. One of them is a depressive delusion. The person will feel really bad because they feel like they've committed a horrible crime or a deed. Somatic delusions, if you remember the word soma, what does that mean? Body. So, somatic delusions have to do with the body. They believe that their body is rotting away or emitting foul odors or has something else wrong with it. We also see influence delusion. They feel like they're being controlled by an outside force, whether it's a god or the government or aliens, whatever that might be. There's also a delusion of persecution. It's like others are out to get them. And then there's reference delusion, where they ascribe some personal meaning to unrelated events. So the fact that they did or did not do something has affected maybe someone being in a car accident or some, big tragedy or something like that. Hallucinations are kind of similar, but this is more of a sensation than just like a thought. They believe that they're seeing, hearing, or smelling things that don't exist in the real world. So they may hear voices, they may command a patient to hurt themselves or other people. They may feel insects crawling on them. That's very closely related to the somatic delusion. They may taste poisons, smell gas, and that they see enemies that are out to get them, or somehow hear them or sense them. As you can imagine, hallucinations and delusions are usually very closely linked. So there are different types of delusion disorders. This is a type of psychosis that is marked by severe delusions of grandeur, jealousy, persecution, and similar preoccupations. And there's 5 different types. I'm going to go through them. The first one is erotomaniac. These are delusions that they are loved, especially by someone famous. These individuals tend to become stalkers. And they often think that, if they just do this one big thing, that their love interest will see them and notice them and they'll live happily ever after. This was the case with the person that shot President Reagan. They thought that some celebrity would notice them by doing that action and therefore gain her affection. And obviously that didn't happen. We see grandiose delusions. These are delusions of greatness, of having unrecognized talent, knowledge, or insight. Maybe they believe that they're God or a famous person. There's actually a famous case called the 3 Jesuses of Ypsilanti. And in this case, and this is a essay, you can actually find this online. There were 3 men who all thought that they were Jesus, and they put them together in a room and essentially wanted to see who was the most Jesus. As you can imagine, it was quite an interesting story. I believe that's written by Oliver Sacks. Again, you can find that available online. There's jealousy delusions. So that's an all-consuming belief that their spouse has been unfaithful to them. There are persecutory illusions. They feel like they're being conspired against, cheated on, or spied upon. And then somatic delusions. They may believe that their bodies are rotting or diseased. They may be infested with insects or parasites, or that part of the body is defective. You probably have heard of some of these. Some people think that like their arm is no longer theirs. It's like an alien arm or corpse arm. And they will go to the point, or they go to a doctor and like, you have to take off my arm. It's not mine. And obviously a doctor is not going to do that. Hopefully they send them for a psych eval in the process. But sometimes they'll even go to the point where they will try to amputate their own limb to try to get rid of it. And obviously that is very harmful and is not actually solving the problem. There's also paranoid psychosis. This is a delusion disorder centered especially around delusions of persecution. They're paranoid. They think someone's watching them, controlling them, trying to hurt them, chase them. It's obviously, it would be very, very disturbing to feel this way. And oftentimes we classify these as positive symptoms. And again, not positive as in this feels great. It's positive as in there's an addition of symptomology. Just like we saw, positive and negative reinforcement and punishments when it comes to operant conditioning. Positive means that there's a presence of a new, like a new behavior or something like that. And then negative symptoms is a removal of a behavior. So some of the positive symptoms, they may have delusions. We've already covered those. They may have a private version of what's going on. And these individuals aren't necessarily dangerous, but they can be. And oftentimes, I know if they are dangerous, it's because they're lashing out in self-defense. They will oftentimes feel like they need to protect themselves from whoever is trying to hurt them or control them or catch them. And schizophrenia is a very common type of delusional disorder. And we're going to be talking about schizophrenia more coming up. There's also negative symptoms. They may be wildly elated or hyper emotional, meaning they have a removal of their ability to control their emotions. They may have flat affect, which is when the face becomes frozen and they have this blank expression. They're not actually, producing facial expressions. They may become depressed, apathetic, or lack emotion. And they can have what's called word salad. This is garbled or chaotic speech. They have a loss of the ability to make sense and use language properly. We also see personality disintegration. This is when thoughts, actions, and emotions are no longer controlled. So when a person would typically feel sad, they will start laughing. Or when they, something funny happens, they'll start crying. And you see this disintegration of how they would normally control their emotions. And like I said, schizophrenia is a type of psychotic disorder. So we're going to be covering that in this section. So schizophrenia is a psychosis characterized by delusions, hallucinations, apathy, and a split between thought and emotion. So schizophrenia is a spectrum disorder, and it, again, is classified within the area of psychotic disorders. And again, these are severe mental disorders, and they're characterized by retreat from reality, by hallucinations and delusions, and by social withdrawal. I have a couple of videos for you guys on the playlist, and I think it's actually more than 2 now. I have one of Anderson Cooper where he does a schizophrenia, what do you call it? Demonstration. He has headphones in, and they have voices that speak to him just like a person with schizophrenia may hear. And he has to solve a series of tasks. I have one about children with schizophrenia. We'll talk about it, but schizophrenia is very rare in children. Typically doesn't come on till adolescence and young adulthood. And so for young children to have it is very uncommon. And then I have a video, I know a crash course video that's very useful for this, and a couple others. So go ahead and check those out. They're very helpful to understanding the complexities of this disorder. So some symptoms of schizophrenia. We see abnormal cognition. They have problems with selective attention. They have trouble focusing. They may have paranoia, and that's a symptom marked by preoccupation with delusions relating to a single theme, and especially grandeur and persecution seem to be the most common. They will also hallucinate in relation to their delusion. So they may think that God or cosmic rays are controlling them, and they may use force to protect themselves. This is kind of like the image of someone who wears like the tinfoil hat, who thinks that someone's watching them or the government is spying on them. And they may, go to extreme measures to try to protect themselves. So are people with schizophrenia dangerous? That's very rare. They sometimes, if they have a history of abuse or when they're actively psychotic and experiencing strong delusions, they may lash out on others. But more often is the case is that they're the victim of the violence. If you can imagine, if you have schizophrenia, it's really difficult, first of all, to even recognize that you have this issue. It doesn't just, hit you one day out of the blue. It kind of builds over time. And the delusions and the hallucinations are very, very persistent, but also they're very lifelike and they're very real feeling. So the person may not recognize that they're having this issue. And then it's very difficult to go to school and to hold down a job while you have this active condition, while you're going through a psychotic episode. And because it's hard to hold down a job, you oftentimes won't have health care. And so if you don't have health care, you can't treat the disorder. And if you don't have a job, you're going to end up homeless. So these individuals oftentimes end up on the streets, they end up homeless, and they will self-medicate using drugs and alcohol. So it's a really vicious cycle of, disintegration of their entire life, not just their mental health. If the person has a lot of family support and has access to resources to help them, they can get this condition under control and have medication and therapies that help them. But without all that, it can be really difficult to maintain a normal lifestyle. And so, oftentimes, again, because they're on the streets, they're using drugs and alcohol to self medicate, they're oftentimes going to be victims of violence. Some other symptoms are abnormal affect. This is where they have blunted emotions or inappropriate emotions. They may have abnormal behavior. This can be a withdrawal from contact with others, a loss of interest in their normal activities, and a breakdown of personal habits, and hygiene being one of them. We sometimes will also see catatonia. This is sometimes considered a disorder in its own right, but it's also a symptom of schizophrenia. This is where the person goes through a period of stupor, rigidity, unresponsiveness, posturing, mutism, but sometimes they become agitated or they have purposeless behavior. It's almost like they go into like a coma state, but they're, sitting up, they're just not responding to the environment. Sometimes, though, they appear to be struggling with inner turmoil, trying to, get their thoughts or, what they want to say out. Their body just isn't cooperating. It's obviously a very difficult experience. Some people have disorganized schizophrenia where they have again, more disorganized symptomology. And not every person with schizophrenia has all these symptoms. And again, it's a spectrum disorder. So some people have very mild cases where it's just managed with kind of recognition of, okay, this delusion is incorrect, or, by checking in with a trusted person. Other people really need full-time care. Extreme schizophrenia typically develops in adolescence and young adulthood. It's not usually the case that we see it in children. And if you don't have it by, say, like age 30, 35, it's very unlikely to develop it after that. It's an excellent movie if you get a chance to watch it, called A Beautiful Mind. It's about a brilliant mathematician, and he has schizophrenia, and no one recognizes that he has it until much later, because so much of his work was misunderstood and classified that his delusions kind of played right into that, and his wife didn't know for a very long time. I think it won Best Picture, so you should check it out if you have a chance. Again, we usually see schizophrenia being diagnosed in adolescence or early adulthood, and men are typically diagnosed a little bit earlier than women. It tends to show up earlier. And we see varying rates based off of race and ethnicity. Black men, I believe, experience it a little bit earlier and higher rates. And so we do see some differences based off of essentially an individual's identity. When we look at how it is genetically related or environmentally factored, if you look here in this chart, if a person has two parents with schizophrenia, their chances of developing it themselves is around 45%. If they have an identical twin, so again, they share 100% of their DNA, it's still less than 50%. So you can see there's quite a bit of environmental factors in this, because even having an identical twin, while it's about 50%, it's still only about 50%, even though they say they have the same genetics and same prenatal environment. If they have one parent, it is about 5%. A fraternal twin, it's about 18%, 17%. Siblings, closer to 10%. If their own child has schizophrenia, they're about 12%. And you can see the general population is actually quite small. It's like 0.5%. I know this bar looks a lot bigger than that, but it's about 0.5% of a person developing schizophrenia. So where does it come from? So the quality of family communications and interactions may either encourage or discourage the onset of schizophrenia for someone who is already at high risk genetically. So the quality of family interactions may influence future psychotic episodes being triggered. If parents are critical, harsh, hostile, and have poor communication skills, that may make a person who's high risk more susceptible to the disorder. People who are under chronic stress from living in low-income lifestyles or with a family member who has poor communication may also influence future relapses. So like I said, remember, if a person has schizophrenia, it's very difficult to maintain a normal lifestyle. That puts their children and other relatives at risk, because typically they're kind of living in similar environments. It does not appear that family and lifestyle cause schizophrenia. But there are some critical factors in susceptibility to the disorder that have to be taken into account when we look at prevention and treatment programs. So if you want to prevent someone from, if they have had one schizophrenic episode, and it gets under control, chronic stress and low quality family interactions may trigger a secondary episode later on. We do see some neural and developmental factors that do seem to play a role. So we look at abnormalities in brain structure and neurotransmitter functioning, particularly with dopamine and glutamate. They seem to be associated with schizophrenia. There are drugs that are prescribed to help treat schizophrenia, and they're called phenothiazines. They reduce the dopamine level activity of the brain, and then it seems to be good at reducing positive symptomology, which is excellent. So it seems to have some neurotransmitter functionality with that. We also see abnormalities that may arise in prenatal development and early childhood experiences. So we see those ventricles in those brains, those fluid sacs, they're larger than normal. But sometimes it could be exposure to a prenatal virus or poor nutrition or somehow some synaptic pruning that doesn't happen the way that it should. All those things seem to play a factor in the development of schizophrenia. All right, I'm going to pause here and then we're going to start on the next section in a moment.